We are now joined by Lester Munson. He's the Vice President of International Government Affairs at the BGR Group. That's a lobbying and strategic communication company here in Washington. Lester, thanks so much for coming in. Got a lot of moving pieces. I want to get your analysis on the flurry of diplomacy on the part of China. Second meeting between Xi and Kim in China in just a few months. Well, what do you make of all of this?
Well, there's a lot going on. President Trump has come in and been very active on a number of fronts. He's challenging the status quo on North Korea, on Syria, now with the abrogation of the Iran deal. He's willing to cause chaos to try and change things for the better for the U.S., and we're seeing that in the relationship directly with China and also with the situation in North Korea. The new Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, is either in Pyongyang or on his way there right now. So there's just a flurry of activity, and the new president in Washington is looking for opportunity and find them. And I think China, which is the most important relationship that the U.S. has, is rightly involved in many of these. And so it's going to be a real challenge, I think, for Beijing to deal with this president who's proven to be a handful.
And Premier Li is meeting with Shinzo Abe and, of course, Moon Jae-in. That's going to be taking place as well. From a diplomatic standpoint, where does China land in all of this? Of course, they were a big part of the six-party talks, but we don't know if that's going to be rekindled. We really don't know what's going to happen, do we?
That's right. There's a lot of options. There's a lot of variables. There's a lot of different vectors that could be factors as we go forward. And I think China is going to play a critical role in almost all of these situations. It's a rising power. It's asserting itself in new areas. And I think there's going to be a real emphasis on the response from Beijing on all these fronts, particularly North Korea, and of course with the trade disputes between the U.S. and China. That's going to be a real test.
Let me ask you about Mike Pompeo. You mentioned that he's going to Pyongyang. Obviously, you have to do the groundwork before you have these two leaders sit down. And a lot of times, as you well know, you've worked in this sort of thing, you don't want them to go in and just meet. You want them to have come out with some kind of an... How much groundwork needs to go into this? How do you rekindle a relationship that doesn't really even exist? You've got a brand new Secretary of State. I mean, there are a lot of hurdles before these two men sit down, right?
There's huge hurdles. Other U.S. administrations have tried to do this. The Clinton administration famously sent its Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, to Pyongyang. She watched some magnificent parades, but not much ended up coming out of that. So there's been fits and starts, and as Americans, we're a little skeptical that this is going to go anywhere, but it's good that the administration is trying. I think Mike Pompeo is exactly the right guy to do this. He doesn't seek the spotlight for himself. He's extremely smart. He's very careful in what he does. He understands the intelligence community and the things that it brings to the table. So he seems to be the right guy to be able to deal with Kim in Pyongyang.
I talked to Professor Mohammad Morandi. We played a chunk of that earlier, and I asked him about the Iran deal. How does that complicate things with the negotiation with the DPRK? And he said, any country should think twice about entering into an agreement with the United States, given the fact that they're stepping away from the JCPOA. Do you think that's accurate? I mean, how does that affect the negotiations? I mean, if I'm going in a negotiation with you and it's a day after you just bailed on a negotiation, I'd be wary, wouldn't I?
Well, I think there's a point there, and I think that's something that other world leaders do need to think about. But there's another way of looking at it that I think is more important. President Trump has followed through on the commitments he made to the American people in the campaign. He talked about getting rid of the Iran deal. He's always been a critic of it, and now he's done that. So he's fulfilled one of his campaign promises. And I think particularly on the Iran deal, it's important to remember this was a signature effort of President Obama that he did not submit to the Senate for ratification. He knew it did not have bipartisan support. I think anyone who was a careful watcher of the Iran deal knew that if a Republican took over, that deal was probably gone.
Quickly, because we've run out of time, but I want to get your thoughts on this. What can we realistically expect to see from this summit between Trump and Kim?
Well, I think there's going to be hopefully a lot of steps forward, symbolic steps, even if they're just symbolic steps. Those are important. Lowering the level of tension on the peninsula is important. Getting the two peoples, the people of South Korea and the people of North Korea, to get used to the idea that they could become one country again is going to be critically important. If President Trump comes back with some assurances that there'll be verifiable inspections and a real end to the nuclear program in North Korea, that'll be a huge win.
Lester, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.